Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. In this episode, I'm going to be following on from my last podcast, which was an introduction to ESOS, and explain how to comply with ESOS in this one. So we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of the different options, and then we're going to go into detail on how to carry out the ESOS audits or to implement ISO 50001. So one option is to carry out ESOS energy audits. The advantage of this is it covers all energy uses, so buildings, industrial processes and transport, and it's a fairly straightforward activity. It is time consuming though. You do need to draw on a lot of data from your existing utility bills, and it may potentially be information that you haven't gathered before, which could be fuel in terms of not just the price that you're paying for fuel, but also in terms of the actual volume of fuel, for example. The disadvantage of the ESOS energy audits is that really it's just a tick box exercise, and it doesn't actually provide you with a mechanism for implementation and management of energy saving opportunities. So that's something to consider. But it will help you to meet the requirements of the Environment Agency. So if you're just looking for the quick and dirty option just to meet the requirements of the Environment Agency, that's probably the best route for you. If, however, you want to take energy management seriously and you actually want to make improvements within your business on an ongoing basis and have roles, responsibilities, people accountable for making sure that you're reducing your energy bill and being more environmentally friendly and reducing your carbon footprint, then ISO 50001 is the best route because it provides everything that you do on ESOS for the energy audits, but it also puts in place an energy management system. So this can be across your entire organisation, and at the end of the day it provides a framework for continual improvement. So it meets the minimum requirements of ESOS, plus gives you that added value for the business. There are a couple of other options, but they only cover part of the ESOS requirements, so you're not going to meet the full ESOS requirements if you go down this route, which is the Green Deal assessments and also the display energy certificates. So they're just restricted to buildings only. So let's look at the ESOS energy audits first of all and how you actually do these. Well, first of all, you need to plan the audits, carry them out, collect your data, identify your opportunities for improvement, pull all the documentation together, and then report that to the Environment Agency. So I'm just going to break those key steps down in further detail. So at the planning stage, you need to look at which sites are in the scope of ESOS. What energy consuming activities are undertaken at every location? What kind of transportation do you have and what is it used for and how much fuel are you using? And you need to calculate the total percentage of energy consumption for each site and activity. That then will enable you to plan where to focus the ESOS audits in order to gain the most benefit. So you don't necessarily need to physically visit and audit every single site, but you do need the data from every single site. And then what you can then do is, obviously depending on the number of sites, you can then sample which sites you're going to visit and audit. So for example, you might have a head office. So they're using electricity and gas because they've got lighting, equipment, they've got a boiler, for example, for heating water. You might have vehicles as well that are using up diesel, and you might have a warehouse and a storage facility. So these are all different types of sites and will have different types of activities. So it's recommended that you include at least one of each of those types of sites within your energy audit. There is something called the Minimis Rule. So this gives you a little bit of flexibility, and that flexibility is to exclude up to 10% of your identified energy consumption. So the things to consider here when excluding energy consumption is look at the quick wins and where you can gain the greatest benefit in terms of focusing your efforts on energy management. But any exclusions that you do have got to be clearly detailed within your evidence pack that you submit to the Environment Agency. And you also need to include the rationale for that exclusion. So what kind of data sources can you use? Where do you begin? Well, you can start by looking at meter readings and schedules. So that can cover things like electricity and gas. Also, delivery notes if you've had any gas canisters delivered, or liquid and solid fuels as well, and wastes. You might have stock records that you have on site. And you also might have some automatic readings for meters. Like some organisations will have smart half-hourly meetings as well, which will have a data output. So you need to be using these verifiable data sources across all the key activities within the business. So if you had freight, for example, you'd be looking at diesel. You need to look at consumption in terms of the litres that are used, and also the conversion as well. So there's quite a lot of information on this in the Environment Agency website, or you can go to a consultancy firm like ours, like Blackmores, which can help to deal with all the calculations for you. So you need to do that with all key activities. So what goes on within buildings, company vehicle travel. So you need to look at the volumes, the quantities, and the equivalent of that energy consumption as well. And then from that, you can then deduce the total energy consumption from each of those activities across the organisation. So you do need to make sure that you allow time to gather that information. And it can be quite difficult if you're just doing that on your own. So why don't you get help from other people within your company, like your facilities manager? So they can gather up information on meter readings. Your travel team. So if you do quite a lot of travel, either in the UK or internationally, you should be able to get these reports from that team. And also any organisation that does maintenance for you as well, externally, that could provide that information for you. And you might have vehicle fleet managers that can provide information, along with, of course, your finance department, which can provide information for you. So the next stage is to create an audit plan. So as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to audit every single site, so it's done on a sample basis. But you need to explain that methodology within your audit report when you submit it as part of your evidence pack to the Environment Agency. And then finally, you need to make sure that you've got a qualified, registered lead assessor that can oversee the ESOS assessment. So there are a number of those that are available that you can find online, and we also have one at Blackmores as well that can do that for you. But you also need to make sure you've got all your evidence, notes, calculations and photographs taken at the time of the audit and included within that evidence pack, because that's your supporting information. I think one of the most beneficial things to come out of this exercise, apart from obviously just doing the number crunching, which I guess it has a value in itself, because then you've got a very clear understanding of the cost of energy consumption within your business. But for me, I think the most important thing is to look at what you're going to do with that next. Now, 4 years ago, when we had the phase 1 of ESOS, I think a lot of businesses just let that report gather dust. Whereas what you could potentially be doing, and what the Environment Agency should be encouraging businesses to do, is to actually use that as a vehicle to identify energy saving opportunities, which obviously is the whole point of ESOS. But this part of it isn't actually mandatory. They're not checking to see if you have actually made those improvements, unfortunately, in my opinion, for what it's worth. But yeah, you need to look at what those potential financial savings are. What's the return on investment if you did switch your lights to LED? So you need to look at that, and ideally, if you can, do some life cycle cost analysis, where it's practical, of course. Okay, so once the ESOS report's been completed, it's been signed off by your ESOS lead assessor. You also need to get 1 or 2 of the directors within the organisation to sign that off. And then the actual notification is made online. It's a fairly quick and easy process to do that. And just a reminder, the deadline's of 5th of December 2019 this year. So the ESOS Energy Audits is one route to compliance for ESOS. The other route is ISO 50001. And we're finding that more and more organisations are starting to go down this route. So 50001 is the leading international energy management standard. So for those of you that have already got a management system in place, so it might be ISO 9001, the quality standard, or ISO 14001, you'll understand that it's a framework for managing your business in a better way. And obviously, in this particular case, it's managing energy management in a better way. So there are lots of drivers why businesses are now implementing ISO 50001. Some of it is cost related, so obviously, unfortunately, having increase in energy prices all the time, and we are reliant on certain energy providers as well. But also there's increasing legislation and regulations, so we've actually implemented 50001 not just in the UK, but internationally for organisations, because there is more and more interest now from governments that businesses act responsibly and they can demonstrate that to their local governments. But also, just generally in business, I think there's more pressure from different stakeholders to go green and to prove it. So that's why 50001 is seen to be the gold standard as far as energy management is concerned. So some of those benefits of having that energy system in place is it helps to reduce costs, it improves legal compliance, as well as satisfying stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier, but it also can give a competitive advantage. It might be worthwhile looking within your industry how many other organisations have got 50001. If there aren't that many at this stage, then this could give you a unique selling point. So it's worthwhile going for, particularly if you've already got an environmental management system, because all you're doing is integrating the 50001 elements and it's fairly straightforward. And obviously, it can help to enhance your reputation and it can be beneficial from a sales and marketing perspective. So there's a lot of commonality across 9001, 14001, the health and safety standard ISO 45001, believe it or not, with 50001. So there is a lot of common requirements across all of those standards because they're all based on something called Annex SL, which is a high-level framework for ISO standards nowadays. So where do you begin with looking at implementing ISO 50001? Well, what I'll do is I'll just take you very briefly through what you would go through with Blackmores. So we're a consultancy firm that's implemented this standard for many years, and we also help businesses on an ongoing basis to maintain their energy management system. So the first thing that we do is spend a day on site and carry out a gap analysis. So that's where we start to gather all of that information on how you're managing energy within the business. This helps us to identify where the gaps are, and also where the strengths are. And ideally, we want to facilitate an energy working group to champion the project throughout the organisation. We also carry out an energy review, which in effect is like the ESOS energy audits, but it's a little bit more thorough than that, because that helps us to set an energy baseline, energy performance indicators, and it really does help to drive a commitment for energy improvement within the business. Once we've done that, the next phase is just to document key processes and policies, which of course this isn't a requirement of the ESOS energy audits, but this is something that's going to be able to add value to your firm moving forward, as well as identifying any key legislation as well. So typically the sorts of documents you would have in place for an energy management system is an energy policy statement, operational controls and how you manage energy targets and programs, and a legal register which identifies the applicable legislation. So there's some of the key documents that you would have in your energy management system. Once you've done that, ideally you want to upload that to your server and provide awareness training for employees. So that could be done via, for example, a lunch and learn session, it could be done via toolbox talks, or it could be online. So we've got a 50001 awareness e-learning course, for example, at Blackmores that we provide. So the next stage is to make sure that you keep training records so that you can prove that your employees have been made aware of energy management within the firm. So if you're going to go for certification, the final stage is just checking that everything's compliant. So what we do here is we have a program of internal audits and we just verify that everything's working as it should be. So we can see how we're performing against the management system requirements. And finally, we'll have a meeting at the end of that to review the performance, and that's called a management review meeting. and we want to be able to record the inputs and outputs of that ready for the assessment. So I'd say within between 6 to 12 months, depending on the size of your organisation, you'll be ready for your assessment. So please do bear that in mind when you're reaching that deadline of the 5th of December. So if you're looking at 50,001, now is the time to begin your journey, and that should give you enough time to meet that deadline by the end of the year. The assessment is done in 2 stages. One is a document review, where they're looking at your policies and procedures. And stage 2 is where the assessor will expect to see evidence of compliance. Now, we have recorded a podcast earlier on in the series on what to expect during an assessment, so I definitely recommend listening to that if you'd like more insider tips on what to expect during that assessment. So following on from that, you just simply celebrate your success. You want to be able to communicate that to all of your stakeholders. And of course, that automatically means that you comply with ESOS as well. And not just this year, but year after year after year. So it's a win-win really. So hopefully that's provided you with an overview of the 2 main routes. So the ESOS Energy Audits and also the ISO 50001 Energy Management System route. I hope that's been of some help to you. If you would like any further information,